But screen use space. Today's breakout is all about whatever the heck ES6 is. This isn't going to be about the web server stuff that you did this morning. Right? If you do have questions about this morning stuff or the stuff that you're doing so far right now, we can totally take some time to talk about that, like at the end of the breakout. What we're going to do for the big chunk of this is essentially work through like a kind of like a mixed bag, like a fruit salad situation. This is your all dressed chips of like JavaScript. Like we're getting just a variety pack of interesting things, and I'm kind of gonna like there's no direct theme through the lecture, right? It's more about look at this cool thing, right? And then I want you to play around with this stuff. Now, before I do that, I wanted to ask, like, how are you all finding the beginning of Tiny App? How's that working out? Wait, what was that? Wonderful? Awesome. Sweet. So you thought the mock test was tremendous, and that the day one of Tiny App here is wonderful. That's really good. That's good. Yeah, awesome. That's what I like to hear. Legit though, if you're having troubles with it, that's what the mentors are here for. That's what I'm here for. So come reach out. Now, ES6 is, 3 letters in here. If you're like a video game person, there's like a certain phrase. As soon as you see like 2 letters and a number, well, not 2 letters and a number, like 2 letters and then a word, like ES6. It's in the game. Like, yeah. And it's going to be just as exciting as video games. Now, you're lucky because today's lecture, today's breakout is something special about it. I've got slides. This is the one breakout where I have slides. So, some topics. What are some of the things that we're going to look at? We're going to talk about what ES6... Actually, yo, Ralph. Sorry. We're going to talk about what ES6 is. What does it stand for? We're going to look at the JavaScript ecosystem. We're going to totally skip strict mode. Not doing that. And then we're looking at a bunch of neat features. Right? There is nothing like in particular today that I want you to like memorize. Right? This is just about looking at some of the cool things that you can do with JavaScript. Right? I'm going to give you like a cheat sheet that you can use to kind of like learn this stuff and apply it. Now, to start off, ES6, also known as ES 2015. So ES stands for ECMAScript or ECMA script, which is related to JavaScript. So we go from ES to ECMA to JavaScript. Now, ECMA stands for European Computer Manufacturers Association. And what ECMA is genuinely, do you know how this morning I brought up the graybeards? Right? Like, I brought up these dudes. And I'm like, a bunch of nerds get together and they decide something. Yeah, like that's what ECMA is. If we look up like ECMA, I don't know, convention. I've never Googled this before. ECMA conference, maybe? Let's see. The East Coast Music Association. Nah, so ECMA JS conference. I mean, just a bunch of nerds get together and they talk about JavaScript. But in this situation here, when we talk about ECMA, it's a group of people, right, the European Computer Manufacturers Association, they get together and, decide what this language should be. What should this language have? They don't build the language. They don't make it work. They just come up with a specification to say that the language should have these things. Right? And that language is called ECMAScript. Right? Now, when it actually gets created, when somebody sits down and makes the program to understand that language, we'll call it JavaScript. Now, these people, like ECMA, they get together and they put together like new versions of the language specification once in a while. The last time that they did it before ES6, was in 2009 for ES5, right? Yeah, so it's like a good chunk of time, right, between 2009 and 2015, right? So ES6 was a huge kind of thing in the community, right, because it had been a long time, right, since the previous version, and because JavaScript had become immensely more popular than it was even before in 2009. It was already really popular, and by 2015 it was even more popular. So ES6 comes out, it's got all these new kind of things that we're going to look at, but it kind of introduces the question of like, why do we need entirely new standards? Why is the language not just good? Why do we have to have like a new version of the language come out? So I've boiled it down to these 2 points. We need new standards in a language because we often find better ways of expressing ourselves, and the problems that we face will change over time. So we'll need different language to address those different problems, right? For example, finding better ways of expressing ourselves, used to be super cool to be like YOLO, right, or whatever, and now it's not, right? As far as I know, people say yeet now, like that's a word. I don't know what it means. Like YEET. I'm seeing Rachel laugh there. Do you have what does it mean? Nobody has been able to explain this to me. It's like, see, even that I don't understand, right? On point? Like ballet on point? Like this. Okay. Cool. So it's like, tasty sauce. Yes. So, it used to be cool to be like YOLO, or, now it's like whatever. There's other words. We find better ways of expressing ourselves. And the thing is, we also find different problems that we have to deal with, right? Like, now, like, ghosting is a thing, right, that people do meanly, right? It's always been a thing, but not in like the same way, right? Or people have different kind of words for the different things that happen online, but there was no internet before, right? So like we have to come up with new words to explain that stuff. Exact same thing with JavaScript. Exact same thing with languages, right? So between 2009 and 2015, right, the way that websites get built changed, right? The databases that exist changed. The backends that exist, they changed, right? So we run into new problems, and we need the language to evolve with that. So as a little bit of history, JavaScript is a language that first appeared in 1995, right? I'm not going to quiz you on this. JavaScript is a language that's been influenced by other languages. So this language didn't pop out of nowhere, right? JavaScript is built up of the best elements of languages like Scheme and Python and Perl, right? If you're ever interested in like how JavaScript, like you like one particular part of it, right? It might be interesting to dig into where does that part of JavaScript come from. Maybe you really like callbacks, right? And you say, oh, like why does JavaScript have callbacks? Right? You might find out that, oh, callbacks are a thing from Scheme or something. So languages, they are not just a point in time. They're influenced by like societal changes, what was popular at the time. For example, here, JavaScript arose out of the need for having a programming language built into a web browser, right? At the time, web browsers were just used to look at HTML and CSS. But the people who were making web browsers said, hey, you know what? It would be really, really useful to have a small little programming language in there that could do interactivity stuff. Because with HTML and CSS, you can't do any interaction stuff, right? So they said, hey, we need a little programming language. So they got Brendan Eich, not Brandon, but Brendan Eich, to develop a prototype of a language to put into Netscape Navigator, a browser. And Brendan built this up in 10 days, right? Yeah, just 10 days, put together a hacky language, and it worked. Yeah, easy, whatever, right? The thing is, these languages, they're not actually huge, right? They're built up of little components, right? You end up using the languages to do really cool things, but the languages themselves, they might be pretty basic, right? Now, language was kind of hacked together in 10 days, and they gave it a name. They're like, okay, we need to come up with a name for it, and they called it JavaScript. for one reason. So Java is another programming language. Java is another programming language that was really popular in the mid-90s. Right? It's still used, but just not as popular. So they said, hey, you know what? How do we get people to come look at our new language, JavaScript? We could call it JavaScript, so that people might think it's related. Right? It's like making a band that has a name similar to another band. Right? No, we're Metallico. You don't get it. We're different, right? Like that's what it is. Completely unrelated. Java and JavaScript, not the same thing at all. Not related, except for the fact that they were both popular around the same time, and their names are similar. So, when we talk about a language, there is the language itself is a specification saying JavaScript has for loops. JavaScript has if statements, right? These are the things that a language has. You know, nerds write it down and then it's like, cool, it exists on a piece of paper. But the language needs to actually be implemented somewhere. Like, we need a program that is able to take text files that are written in that language and read it. Otherwise, it's just code written on a piece of paper that doesn't end up doing anything. So, we, as web developers, are going to run into JavaScript being used in two main places. Right? Two main places where there is a program that can that can understand JavaScript. One of them is on the client side, and the other one's going to be on the server side. So on the client side, we have our browsers. Our browsers, such as Chrome or Firefox, they come packed with a program built into it called an engine. And that engine is going to understand JavaScript. So Chrome has an engine called V8. Firefox has an engine called SpiderMonkey. Right? These are just programs that are able to read text files and understand them as JavaScript. Right? In the same way that you can read the program with your eyes and understand it as JavaScript, these are programs that actually run the code. On the server side, Node.js, right, which we've been using, that's built on top of the V8 engine. Right? So it's important to understand that there has to be a program that reads the code that you write and does stuff with it. Right? When we're talking about something like JavaScript. So this here is the JavaScript ecosystem, meaning we start off a standard, a specification like ECMAScript, right, needs to be implemented into something like V8 or SpiderMonkey. Right? The people who make V8 have to look at the standard and make sure that their program actually implements everything that the standard says. Right? Oh, okay, I've got for loops in there. Oh, okay, I've got this other stuff in there. So that being said, right? That being said, when something like ES6 gets introduced as a standard, there's a certain amount of time that it takes for other people, right, who build these programs like V8 and SpiderMonkey. It takes time for them to implement these features. This is why, if you've heard people complain about things like Internet Explorer before and saying like, oh, Internet Explorer is trash, right? That's because Internet Explorer, right, was like really slow at building up these new features that they were asked to build up. Right? So a browser like Internet Explorer just wasn't behaving the same way as a browser like Chrome, where the developers were just faster and better at getting all the features implemented. Right? There are a couple key features that, you know, got released with ES6. Right? All of these features are now available. Like, you can use these, like, anywhere that you're going to be working, you can use this stuff. Right? And I'm going to recommend that over the course of the rest of the program, including right now in TinyApp, you try and take some of the things that we're going to talk about today, right, and use them in your projects. So these features, some of them are going to be bigger, some of them are going to be smaller, right? You don't have to opt into all of them. And they are the kind of thing that you can like pick and choose a little bit. But for the most part, I want you to address or to look at these things in terms of how do they improve my quality of life as a developer? Right? How do they improve my quality of life? So the first one is this for of and for in situation. So before ES6, and I'm just going to pop into about blank. before ES6, if I wanted to make for loops, I had like essentially one choice. Here's a variable of values maybe that goes A, B, C, and D. And if I wanted to loop through each one of them, I would have to make my classic for var I equals 0, well, I is less than values.length, I plus plus. I have to make this classic kind of for loop situation where I can then console log values of I. And I need to go through the work of saying initialize a variable at 0, make it go up one by one, make it go until it's under like values.length. When you want to print the thing out, you have to go values index of I. There's just so much work that I have to put into making this loop. And it feels annoying as a developer if all you want to do is just loop through a thing. I'm always going to loop through one by one. Why do I need to say this information? Obviously, I only want to loop through while I still have elements. So like, why do I need to say this? Obviously, I'm going to be starting from the very first element. Like, why do I need to say this? Right? As a developer, that's a question that like people had been asking themselves, right? So the people who made ECMAScript, they said, hey, you know what? Fine, if you're looping through every element, you get these two options now on top. I can go for var index in values log index. Oh, whoops. No, not index db. That is, I have no idea what that is. Console log index. So now if I look at my values, I have A, B, C, D. And if I go var index in values, it's going to go through each one of the values and console log the index. Right, for var index in. And if I change in instead to of, so I'll often write this as for var element of values. Now I get every element. And I don't need to do the work of the array indexing. I don't need to do the work of setting an initial condition and an ending and a step. Right? It just kind of does it for me. Right? Nice quality of life. Right? So this is something, again, you don't have to do for var in and var of. Right? You don't have to do it, but why not? Right? If it improves your life a little bit. Right? This gives me less room for error, because often what I'll find myself doing here by accident is messing up this part or messing up this part over here. Right? I'm seeing some people nod, right? Or I'll mess up this thing all the time. Right? There's almost no way for me to mess this up. The only place where I can mess up is writing in instead of or of instead of in. Right? And the way you can remember that is in could be short for index. So then of is going to be the element. Right? The neat thing about for in is that it also works with objects. So if I have an object like this here is going to be var obj equals and then a1 b2 c3. So some object. I can go for var key in object, and this will loop through every one of the keys. Awesome. That's actually very useful for something that you're trying to do with TinyApp, right? You cannot do for var of for an object. It just won't let you. Right. Cool. Yeah. These are the kinds of changes that show up in ES6. These kinds of things, right? Things that you can opt into that make your life a little bit simpler. Right. If we were to look at, actually, are there any questions about this at the moment? Yep. For the of, right? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why they chose to do that. Technically, of, I think, is supposed to only work with iterable things, which are things that have an order. Objects don't have an order, right? Yeah, right. Yeah. For now, you're gonna have to do in and then here it would have to be obj key, like that. That's really like our only option at the moment. But I agree with you. It is annoying that we have to do that. Yeah, they might like actually I think ES7 is already like slowly kind of being rolled out. Yeah, and then there's an ES8 and an ES9 and an ES next. Yeah. Well, there's new versions all the time. ES endgame, right? Like there's so many of these. Yeah. Yeah. So the next thing that I want to talk about, and this one's fairly important, is let and const and var. Right? So far you've been using var. Right? So far you've been using var. From this moment onwards, I am telling you to use let and const. Right? You should never, ever again, for the bootcamp, use var. Right? So go through anything that you've made for Tiny App so far, change it to const. Right? And then anything that can't be const, change it to let. And we're going to talk about why in a second. Right? So the thing about var, to kind of frame this, is that var does not behave the way we kind of expect it to. So let me do this. I do not currently have a variable called food. So if I go food, uncaught reference error. Cool. Then I go var food equals potato. Right? And I go food. And I get potato. Right? If I tried to console.log food without having it, so I've just refreshed my page so I don't have it, it throws an error. Right? So that's the important part. If I console log something that doesn't exist, it should throw an error. Now, here I'm going to make a function that says say food. And what this is going to say is it's going to console.log food. And right after it, it's going to say var food equals potato. Okay? And now I'm going to call say food. So what this should do is start from the top here, run console log food, and immediately throw an error. Or at least this is the way I would expect it to work. Right? It should immediately throw an error because food isn't defined yet. But if I run this, what I actually get is undefined. Which is stupid. It's dumb. The other thing here is, if I go food right now, like, it's undefined here, but, like, why was it that this thing was able to console log something before it was defined? Right? You can go ahead and even delete this line here, right, which shouldn't really make a difference. When I go say food now it throws an error. So var actually does a thing called hoisting, right? It does a thing called hoisting, which is kind of counterintuitive to the way that you expect a variable to work. So when I in here write something like var food equals potato, what JavaScript does is it splits this into two lines. Right? Without asking me, it splits it into two lines. And this is just by design inside of JavaScript. They say, no, this is this. Right? And what hoisting means, right, or the effect that that's going to have for us is that if I write code like this function say food, what var is going to do is it's going to take this and it's going to pull it all the way up here. And then it's going to say food equals potato. Right? That's what's happening underneath. It's just not immediately visible to me as a programmer, so it can cause some issues when I don't know that that's what's going on. Right? That's one of the main issues with var, is that I'm able to access something that I don't think that I should be able to access. Right? It's not that it's broken. It's not that it's broken. It's done by design. But for new programmers and even seasoned programmers, right, it doesn't act the way that one would expect it to. Right? Here's another little demo, is that if I had, I'm using curly braces not to make an object right now, but to make scope. I think if I go var I equals 12, and I ran this, and then I went I right now, the I escapes the scope, which is annoying. So I use curly braces again, not to make an object, but just to create a block of code. This isn't a thing you're ever going to be doing, but just to show you that the I can escape scope. You sometimes find this when you do like a for loop for var I equals 0 while I is less than 10 I++, and I'll just loop. You know, so it did a loop. I just didn't print anything. If I check the value of I now, it's 10. Like I escaped the scope of the loop. Let me just run that again. So I escapes the scope of the loop. Again, does not feel right, because when I did my scope lecture for y'all, I showed you that I erased things. I erased like an entire world, right? But if you remember, I said I'm like hand waving things a little bit. This is what I meant, is that var actually sneaks out. So instead, what ES6 introduces is let. So if I go let food equal potato here, inside of a particular scope, if I try to access it afterwards, it's not there, not defined, right? In the way that I expect it to, right? Same if I was to make a for loop that said something for let, you know, we'll do let p equals 0 while p is less than 10 p++, right? P only exists inside the for loop, and if I try to access it afterwards outside, it's undefined, right? So let is going to be like var, except it's going to behave the way you expect it to, right? Putting that into words, let lets us create block scope variables that conveniently are not affected by hoisting. So if I tried to do that say food example again from the beginning, and I'm going to have all the examples, I'm going to send them to you, but if I was to do this with let food equal potato, when I call say food, this is going to throw an error, right? It is going to throw an error. Does let make sense to people? Is this the way that you imagined the var maybe worked before? This was the way I thought var worked until I found out that it doesn't, right? So let lets us make block scope variables. Const is a similar situation, right? That is going to give us variables that we can't change, right? Or rather, it gives us variables that we can't reassign. So if I have a variable here, if I have a variable var pizza equals cheese, oh shoot, not var, const pizza equals cheese, I am not able to say pizza equals pepperoni. As soon as I go enter here, it tells me, hey, you're not allowed to reassign a constant variable. Right? This is useful for me in case I want to make something that should be protected. Right? A lot of the time, the place where bugs pop up is that you might have written code that goes and changes some values that weren't supposed to be changed. And if you call things const by default, right, you can be sure that when you define a value, it does not change unless you tell it explicitly to change. Pardon? Exactly, right? So unless you explicitly say I want to add something there, like I have to be super like deliberate about changing values, and I'll show you what that looks like. Right? My suggestion for you is going to be use const everywhere unless you find that you have to reassign something. And when you have to reassign something, change it from const to let. Const should be your default. Right? So where you used to write var, use const now. Right? Again, though, there are things that I might want to change, such as pizza or whatever. I might have to come up with like a solution to that, which is, okay, now I need to say let pizza is this thing. The other thing that I'm going to find is that there are some things that I can modify, right? But there's a distinction. If I have my pizzas start off as, so this is an array, It goes cheese, and then margarita, and then pepperoni. So these are the pizzas. I cannot, like I said, I cannot take pizzas and change it to just cheese and margarita. I'm not allowed to do that. But what I can do is say pizzas.pop. Right? So arrays give me a method that I can use to modify the array. Right? I have to explicitly say pop. And the other thing that I can do is pizzas.push. So I can still modify things. I just have to be deliberate about it. Right? I'm also going to notice, oh, so if I look at pizzas now, it's cheese, margarita, and pineapple. Yes, so when you go pop, what it does is it pops off the very last thing in the array. So not pop, but there are other things. So there's a whole host of methods that you can use or functions that you can use to modify arrays, such as push, pop, unshift, slice. There's a bunch of really kind of interesting ones. So the next thing here is that if I have an object that is const, if I have an object that is const, such as this person named Bradlina, the occupation, I think I came up with, I've been using the name Bradlina for a while, and I think it just hit me where I got that name. Yeah, it's Angelina and Brad Pitt, because it's always been brand. Oh man, I thought I was being creative, and now I get where it comes from. You have no idea how long I've been saying Bradlina. So occupation, we're gonna go actor. This is Bradlina when I look into person. If I tried to reassign person to something else, right, just anything, it'll give me an assignment to constant variable error. But what I can do is change person dot occupation, right, to skydiver. Right, I can reassign parts of an object, right, but I can't reassign the entire object. Right, I look at person now, and Bradlina has occupation skydiver. Right, so use const everywhere. Const. Right? Only use let if you need to. Should you ever use var? No, don't ever use var. Right? You will find that var gets used in like old code or documentation. Right? Change it to const. Okay, and the scoping in const works the same way as let. Okay, the next couple things I'm going to show you are slightly smaller. So the first one is fancy string interpolation, aka template literals. You've already maybe started seeing these a little bit. I think they pop up during the prep course. But this is just a nice way to take some value and bring it into a string as you're building it. So I can write strings with double quotes. I can write strings with single quotes. And I can also write strings with the cute little backticks. Right? They're so cute. I think of them as like fancy strings, or these like the kawaii face. they're like just like really cute strings is the way that I see them. Right? So I can make any string I want. That's fine. The thing that's interesting about the strings that are built with the little backticks is that I can bring in other values. This thing will generate the string 6. Right? If I have const name equals Bruce Wayne, right? I can say Batman is actually, and then name. Batman is actually Bruce Wayne. This is just nicer to look at than me having to write Batman is actually name, and then this. Just look at all the work I have to go through to actually even get this to work. I hate writing this. I hate it. This situation, not fun. Right? Quality of life. Quality of life just improves a little bit. Right? Yes. Yeah. So it only works with the backticks. Right? Because the backticks are going to be special strings called template strings. Right? Template strings. Right? Again, not a thing you have to do, but a thing that if you opt into might improve your quality of life as a developer a lot. Yes. What do you mean by that?
Like if you don't have a template modifier in it like that, you usually make a normal string. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Is there a reason to use single quotes and everything instead of backticks?
I mean, I think it's up to who you ask. In my opinion, I tend to use backticks only if I'm going to be doing something funky, right? So as soon as, like for me, as soon as I'm looking through my code and I see backticks, right, it's like a signal to me that there's going to be something funky happening in there, right? Whereas when I've got single quotes, it's a signal to me that it's just a normal string, right? And it's just the semantic difference there, right? I don't think it actually makes a difference, right? It might be worth looking at seeing if maybe the performance is faster, like maybe it's better with backticks or maybe better with single ticks. But it shouldn't actually make a difference. Yeah. Something you'll notice is with the backticks, you can do funky things like having new lines in here. Right? You can do that. You can do that without a special character. Whereas if I was to try to do that with this, it would break. Like this is going to give me an error. Invalid or unexpected token. So the backticks are going to be like beast. You know, get some good experience with them. Sweet. The other thing here that I want you to see is this thing called arrow functions. Right? So I want you to use, what's that? Huh? Oh, you've been using them? No? So something that you've probably gotten pretty used to now, maybe not used to, that you've seen at this point is callback functions. Right? And you've seen that like functions just get used a lot in JavaScript. Like functions are a big part of JavaScript. Right? Whether they're being invoked directly or whether they're being passed as callbacks or, you know, whatever, functions are just a big chunk of what you have to do with JavaScript. So since in JavaScript we have to write functions so often, developers get tired. They get tired of writing out the word function. Right? Oh man, did you see me sweat there a little bit? Whew. I had to write out the word function. But more kind of explicitly speaking, the word function here is just a lot of noise. Right? You might have even noticed when I was doing the lecture on scopes, I was writing function as like F because I didn't want to write the whole thing out. Right? There's just a lot to it. So if you're looking at thousands of lines of code, right, seeing the word function makes you like it makes me want to scream. Right? So we want to boil away like as much stuff as possible. That's why we just did the template strings. What an arrow function is going to be is that I get to rewrite a function to just say the parameters, a little arrow, and then the body of code that it should run. Right? I don't need the word function there. Right? So we got rid of a couple keystrokes. So if this here is a function for adding two numbers, so number 1 and number 2, I can say in here, okay, return number 1 plus number 2. Okay, and I go save it, and then I say, oh, crap, like how do I run this function? Because if I had run made this like a function literal like this, function add nums, right? I can run this function by going add nums and then passing it two numbers, right? But this function here, it doesn't have a name. It doesn't have a name, and there's no way for me to add a name to it. Arrow functions are by definition anonymous, right? By definition, arrow functions are anonymous, and what I have to do if I want to call them is I'm going to have to save them somewhere. For example, I can make, you know, a variable like const coolfunc to save that arrow function. Now I can go coolfunc on, 1 and 2. Right? So only if I save it somewhere. Where this is going to become useful is when you make callbacks. Right? When you make callbacks, you don't need the name anyways. Right? So if I need to pass a callback somewhere, such as in arrays can have a for each function. Have y'all seen this yet? Right? For each. So for each is supposed to take a callback that runs on every element. Console.log element. But I could rewrite this using arrow function syntax to look like this instead. Right? Just an option. You don't have to, but you could. Right? There's a little bit more streamlining that I can do as well. If, like what I've done right now, this arrow function only has one parameter, I have the option of removing the brackets. Right? Optionally, I can do that. Right? And once you write this kind of code enough, it becomes really nice not to see the word function all over the place. Right? When I can just think about, no, given an element, this is what I do. Right? Here's something even cooler, is that if my function, like this function over here, the one that took num1 and 2, that returned something, right? This function here is just one line, right? If this was many lines, then I would have to keep it like this in the curly braces. But if this function just takes something in and returns something immediately, I can do this. Right? And this is beautiful. Here is a function that, given two numbers, adds the two of them together. Right? And I've been able to write this in a single line. Yes? Exactly. Right? So now some func is going to automatically return that value. Right? So if your arrow function only has one line in it, and it's a return statement, right, you might as well rewrite it to look like this. Might as well. Right? Again, not a thing that you need to do, right? But if you find yourself having tons of little functions that all do little things, right, it might be nicer to rewrite it like this so you don't end up with so much noise. Right? For right now, this is all that arrow functions are. Right? Arrow functions have a little bit of a twist to them that has to do with the way that this works. But this isn't something that you have to deal with right now. So I kind of want you to just kind of explore that on your own, right? Or call me up and I'll show you. It's more something that you're going to find out in week 6 of the program, right? So for right now, right, generally speaking, anywhere that you can use the word function, see if you can rewrite it as an arrow function. Right? There is going to be an example in the notes that I give you that's going to show you where it doesn't work, right? But you'll see that. Are there any questions about this right now? No. Arrow functions are one of the most exciting parts of ES6, right? Because, I mean, look at that. That's so nice. It's so short. Right? The more you take away, right, the less that you have to write, the fewer bugs you're going to have. The only time that you get bugs in a program is when your hands are on the keyboard. So if you reduce the amount of time that your hands are on the keyboard, you're going to have a good time. I'm going to loosely, quickly show you some of the other things that have been added into, and don't worry, we're not going through all the slides, that have been added into ES6. The first one is this thing called destructuring of objects. Right? Getting values out of an object or getting values out of an array can be a little annoying if you have to get a bunch of them. Right? If I have an array like the one I have down there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I want to get just the first two elements, what you know so far is that you'd have to go make a variable first, right? Equals array 0. And then another one that says variable second equals array 1. Okay? Maybe I want the third one. Equals array 3. 2. What you can do in ES6 is that. Var first, comma, second, or whatever you want to call it. Okay? You can name the things anything. Equals the array that you want to pull something from. Right? And JavaScript's just going to suck those things, right, from the array and put them into those variables that you're saying. Right? So if I have, again, const pizzas is cheese and margarita and pepperoni. Right? If I went const, me, like my pizza and Jane's pizza, right, is from pizzas. Nima is going to be cheese, and Jane is going to be margarita. Right? Just much nicer than saying Nima equals pizzas 0. Right? At least in my opinion. If it doesn't feel much nicer to you, that's fine, right? And you can continue doing it the way that you have it. This idea also works with objects. So if I have an object like person. I have an object like person who has a name, an occupation, a particular food. Food is pasta, and a particular show, maybe Game of Thrones, right? And I only care about some of these things. I want to pull them into variables, right? I could do const show equals person.show, right? And then do the same thing for const occupation equals person.occupation. I could totally do that. But using object destructuring, I can go const show an occupation equal person. And this is just nice shorthand to pull all of that stuff into variables. Right? See if you can find ways of using this in the Tiny App project and in the projects that you're going to be doing in the future. Does this kind of idea also make sense? Yeah.
Do the things in that thing have to be the keys?
So the names that I use here, the words that I use here, have to match the keys that I'm trying to pull from. Unlike in the array example where I can name this thing anything, and it'll just take the first and the second. Right? With that array thing, like I can make these things anything I want. I can make these things anything I want, and they'll just pull from the array. Yep. Sweet. Okay. Now, let's see. I'm going to pick... oh, there's only one last thing that I wanted to show you, which is this idea of spread syntax. So destructuring objects means pulling stuff out of an object or pulling stuff out of an array, right, with that kind of syntax here. Spread syntax is going to be sort of like the opposite idea. So what spread is going to mean is sometimes I want to take an object or an array and I want to spread it out in another object or array. So here, for example, is the array. We're going to go const dogs equals Spot and Jujube and Jimothy. Right? Here are a bunch of dogs. If I wanted to make a new array of all of these dogs plus another dog, the dot 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 and then dogs is going to take that array dogs and it's going to spread it. And I think of it like when you're spreading butter on a piece of toast. You just kind of spread. Those little dots are just kind of like spread the dogs, and then I throw another dog in here. I think Sebastian, your dog's name is Friday, right? Frida. I always write Friday. Frida. And now I've got all the dogs plus Frida. Awesome. Right? I didn't have to write any loops. I didn't have to do any hard work. Just go dot, dot, dot. Right? Obviously, it's hard to remember this stuff. Right? I don't expect you to memorize any of this. But I'm giving you the notes that have like a bit of a cheat sheet situation. Right? I recommend writing some of this stuff down on a piece of paper or saving it as your home screen or something and just kind of referring back to it. Because this, immensely useful. Right? When this got released in ES6, people went like, oh my god, I've always wanted this. This is awesome. Right? Because you can do this with objects as well. Or what if I wanted to merge, if I wanted to duplicate this array, like I wanted spot, jujube, Jimothy, spot, jujube, Jimothy. Spread it twice. Right? It's dope. Right? If I want to change the order, I want to do Frida, and then dogs, and then Solomon, right? Friday, Spot, Jujube, Jimothy, Solomon, right? This is really cool. There's another place where you can use this. So here's person. Well, you know what? Let's just do const obj equals a being 1, b being 2, and c being 3. Right? Just an object with 3 keys. If I wanted to make another object, I want to make another object that has everything that obj has plus d being 4. I can go dot, 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 obj, comma. And it merges all that stuff together. Right? Spread. Had to do no work. I didn't have to write any for loops. I didn't have to do any thinking. Right? I just go dot, 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 and I let JavaScript do the work for me. Right? These are things that, I urge you to kind of see where you can integrate into your programs. Right? And cut down on the code that you have to write. Yep.
It's creating a new object. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, so it's not editing the old one, it's creating a new one, right? So if I go look at obj, it's still that. I can merge multiple objects together in this way too. Say there's an obj2 that is e equals 5, c 6, and y 7, and maybe I do a being 9. So one of the keys clashes with something in another object. So obj has a being 1, and obj2 has a being 9. I can merge these two. Right? And even though those keys clash, the one that comes afterwards will just overwrite the first one. Right? So this is one really nice way for me to merge objects together. And what I'm trying to show you with this is I have to write almost no code. Meaning there's almost no place for me to even make a mistake. Right? If I had to do this with a for loop, I know I would make a mistake. Right? I know it would take me a lot of work, and the code will balloon to a point where I'd get frustrated. Right? So by looking for ways to shorten my code and by making it sweeter, right? That's the word that we're going to use, syntactic sugar, to make your code a bit sweeter. Right? A little syntactic sugar. It improves my quality of life. So these are only some of the changes, right? You can see a whole list of all the changes at es6features.org or something. Yeah, es6features.org, which I have linked in the notes. And they just have a whole kind of table of all the things, such as string interpolation. Here is how, down here in red, here's how you used to have to do it. And here's how you can do it now. Whatever. So like you might find it interesting to go through this website. I also have some information in the slides about a thing called, where'd you go? Oh my god, did I take it out? I did. No, I have some information about something called a polyfill, which we might want to kind of read into, but it's not at all necessary for bootcamp, right? It's just stretch if you're interested. Right? Are there any questions? Cool. So do you see what I mean by today's breakout just being kind of an exploration of some interesting things? Again, I don't want you to force yourself to do any of this stuff except for const and let. Right? Do not use var. Right? Everything else is really up to you to kind of explore with for a little while. Right? But start integrating it into your workflow as much as you can. Great. Have a great rest of the day. I'm going to send you notes in a couple minutes. And have fun with the rest of Tiny App.